Welcome to Cyber Mania, cyber talks with the brightest minds in cybersecurity. Discussing risks, AI, emerging threats, workforce challenges, and more. Brought to you by Cyber Range Solutions. With your host, May Brooks.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cyber Mania. With me today is Adam Roth. Adam, how are you today?
I'm incredible. I'm great. Can't complain.
That's always good to hear. So, we always start off the same way with you telling us a little bit about your super interesting cybersecurity journey.
Okay, so um, it all started out when there were dinosaurs. No, I'm kidding. So I've always been into IT one way or another. I got into networking, network security, and then cybersecurity. My introduction into the cybersecurity realm was for a law firm. Worked there approximately 7 years. Learned, and the irony is that I dealt with a lot of the former 8,200 people that trained me from Israel. So I was very lucky to learn from them as well as some U.S. agencies. My former boss at the law firm and I started a podcast, which is kind of how we met you. And thank you so much for being on our podcast, the Security Cocktail Hour.
You.
And by the way, I'm gonna pitch that. Go subscribe on LinkedIn, Security Cocktail Hour. We'd love to have you. That being said,
Absolutely.
um, now I'm in a little bit of a kind of a different field. I provide situational awareness for mostly law enforcement agencies through using video and artificial intelligence. And I still practice cybersecurity on the side, keeping up to date. And that's pretty much it. So that's where I am.
That's great. Now, I'm going to make a confession to whoever's listening to this. We started talking, we started chatting, and like 10 minutes into our chat, we said, well, we need to record this because this is too good to miss. So I'm basically ditching all the questions that I put aside and I was planning to ask you because you're now starting to research something that is super interesting. And let's start with what you did for your master's, and well, we'll take it to your doctorate from there.
So my capstone was basically ethical warfare, how to make ethical warfare or how to make warfare ethical in cybersecurity. So it's really ethical cyber warfare. And people during the capstone journey for my master's were like, how do you make ethical war? How do you make cyber warfare ethical? And I mean, look, we have treaties for biological, radiological, and biological, radiological, and chemical warfare. We kind of have treaties in that, but we don't have treaties at all in cyber warfare on the grand scale. I mean, I think some countries might have their own type of treaties, but how far do you go with with cyber warfare? Do you do things that are completely unhumane, or do you do things little by little in order to kind of get that country into submission? And I'm not advocating cyber warfare at all. I'm just saying if you're going to do that, if a country's going to do that, don't take it to the point where you're really causing issues. And I'll give you one example. Um, Imagine shutting down the electricity for a country. Once
Yeah.
that electricity is shut down, you no longer have the ability to maintain medical equipment. You no longer have to maintain no longer have the ability to maintain refrigeration. Then the food's going to spoil. When the food starts spoiling, then you got to put that food outside, and then you get sanitation issues. And then once you start getting sanitation issues, then you get people get sick, and it's a whole cascading effect of how bad you can bring a country or anywhere to its knees by constantly shutting down resources to that country. And I'll give you this last part of it. To me, cyber warfare is almost like using drones. You're sitting in a keyboard in a room so far removed from that country or from that location that you don't necessarily know the effects that you're having. Even though you know it, the emotional and mental aspects of it are not really as pronounced as you would be if you had boots on the ground. That's my perception. And by the way, God bless anybody who's served in any military protecting the country. I've never been in the military, so I've never had that experience. But I would believe if you were boots on the ground, protecting your country and having, unfortunately, to take somebody's life, that's a little bit different from the cyber warfare.
I completely agree, and I think that's something that we can talk about cybercrime as well. A lot of people, and there are a lot of researchers around it that talk about how people perceive cybercrime and how criminals or cyber criminals perceive their actions, and it's very different. People sort of perceive cybercrime as a crime with no victims. And I've actually seen in research a couple of years ago that a lot of people said, well, if someone steals my credit card, it's fine because the insurance company, the credit card company has insurance and they will reimburse me. Yeah, that's true. But where do you think that money is coming from? And that is super challenging getting the ethical side. That's something that I always contemplate when I teach. For example, when we're we're teaching hacking courses, for example. How do you know that the people that are your students are going to use their knowledge for good and not for bad?
It's no different from, and I don't want to get into the politics, but the 9/11 teaching a person to fly a plane, right? How do you know the person flying the plane is not going to be dangerous? But there's one thing, and you know I love you, May. I'll disagree with you. Um, cyber crime can have a cascading long term effect, if not um, a lifetime effect. People who have certain things like Bitcoin, when that Bitcoin is stolen, that Bitcoin is not returned to you. So if you have all your money in Bitcoin, and I know I knew once I said this to you, I was like, yeah, it's true, right? I know people who put money in Bitcoin had their wallets stolen, and then
Yeah,
they had no money to retire. They had to work. So
yeah,
while your credit card or your bank account might be replenished by your financial institution, your Bitcoins won't.
true. And I think that's also part of the conversation because a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people don't think about the long-term effects of cybercrime or cyber warfare. And I deliberately took it towards cybercrime because when we look from a personal perspective, what can little old me do about cyber warfare? Not a lot, but about cybercrime and preventing it from happening in my house and to my family and to my loved ones. Those are things that not just me as a cybersecurity professional, I think that every person today, and that's something that I know that we had those discussions. I think every person today needs to understand cybersecurity to some degree, maybe not the technical degree, but to some degree in order to protect their kids online. Just like the fact that I have no idea how my car works. I'm not an engineer, I have no idea why it works, but I know that, I hope at least, that when I put my foot on the brake, the car will stop. And I don't need to be an engineer to know that.
It's
There
funny
are.
you say that, right? You know, there's a lot of conspiracy theorists. Unfortunately, in the United States, in the last couple of days, we've been dealing with the issue with Baltimore and the bridge that collapsed.
Yes.
And
Um,
I am not saying it was a cyber crime. I couldn't even begin to tell you if it was. I have no access to any of the logs. I've never seen anything. But imagine that, right? Imagine a threat actor. Imagine um, a nation state really did take care or take control over that ship. Yes, you can have cascading economic effects. And by the way, I mean, this is not to diminish the unfortunate lives that were lost. There were a few, and especially if it's your family, it means everything to you. So thankfully, a lot of lives weren't taken, like a building collapsing, but lives are affected in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. Economic issues, the boats not being able to get in and out of the harbor, the amount of um, the amount of work that's going to go, and the first responders that have to remove that equipment. So one boat crashing into one bridge has caused probably, if not millions, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's really no different than any other cyber crime or or cyber warfare, right? It's horrible, it's terrible. And the same thing, if you have, let's just say you have $10,000 in your bank, and that money is taken by a cyber threat actor, and you don't have the money to pay your mortgage, and you have to wait weeks or months to get that back. If you're not paying, I mean, it depends on where you live, right? Eventually, you could be evicted. Well, what happens if you don't have money for food? So
Yeah,
people live paycheck to paycheck. So even 1 month or 2 months can have a horrible effect on somebody, especially if they were getting ready to pay their college tuition, pay their rent, buy food, whatever it is.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to ask you about the conversation with stakeholders because you've been working with stakeholders in various capacities. How do we communicate that to them? Because I feel, at least from my side, I feel that a lot of stakeholders today, we sort of screamed for the last 20, 30 years, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, and organizations will collapse if they experience a cyber incident. And to be honest, that's one of the things I'm researching in my doctorate is the actual impact of cybersecurity incidents. But the question is, we both agree that cybersecurity is a big deal. We both agree that it can have serious implications on companies, organizations, communities, etc., from various aspects. It could lead to to loss of human lives, but it could be financial, it could be reputational, everything. How do you communicate it to leaders today?
So there's a lot of ways to look at this, right? If it's a law firm and the law firm has a breach and the merger and acquisition data is exfiltrated, it can have cascading effects. But let's be honest, there are organizations, in my opinion, that are too big to fail. And what I mean, I know we speak about too big to fail. We talk about the crisis in the United States many years ago with the issue with having the right amount of money and runs on the bank. But organizations that are really big, even with a breach, they'll suffer. But a lot of organizations eventually will recover. But let's talk about the stakeholders, right? Stakeholders are constantly communicated to, and it's really a weird dynamic, right? We talk about CISO, and one day I hope to be a CISO, right? When I grow up and be a big boy. Um, CISOs have an enormous responsibility. And when I say CISO, it doesn't mean you have to have a CISO in your title. If you are the person that's the main person responsible for the cybersecurity hygiene of your organization, then you're a CISO, right? You're the chief information security officer. You're the one that's conveying risks. Some stakeholders just don't care, right? They're like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, okay. If I spend $5, $10 million for my $1 billion business, do I want to take the risk or accept the risk? And some organizations will accept the risk, like, hey, I'm not doing anything about it, which is why a lot of countries, a lot of municipalities, a lot of states have put laws in place that kind of force the organization into submission. In the United States, and I know your podcast is probably heard by many different countries, in the United States now, not only is it a civil matter, meaning that you can be sued and lose money, but it's become a criminal. It became a criminal act. If you knew or willingly did not do anything to protect an organization's infrastructure, then you could be subject to arrest. So now you can be held civilly in the tens of millions of dollars, or depending on what the loss is, and then criminally. Now, why criminally? Well, there are people who are affected by that, right? If people lose tens of millions of dollars, even though you would think it's a civil act, it's a criminal act because now that law, that legislation says it is. So It depends on what industry you're in. It depends on what you do for a living. It depends what the risk appetite is. It depends if you have cyber insurance. There's so many aspects of it. But the best way to communicate the um, the issues to the stakeholders is non-emotional. Do not be emotional about it. What I mean by that is don't say, if you do it, the world's gonna, you have to say,
Yeah,
look, in my opinion, looking at the facts here, that if you don't do this, according to certain research, it might be a 30% of a breach. Or, by the way, you're not patched up to date. In order to get patched up to date, you have to spend this amount of money because I researched what tool can do this. You have to provide facts, not emotions. Don't
oh,
make it
absolutely.
emotional, make it factual. Be the best possible CISO you can be. Get all your ducks in a row before you speak to the stakeholders. Don't say, if you don't do this, we're out of luck, because that means nothing to somebody. A person who's
Absolutely.
in a C-level leadership that's getting the facts from you has to make a lot of decisions based on what you're providing them. Give them enough information in order to make an informed decision.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that when you talk to stakeholders, you have to consider other things. Unfortunately, I still see a lot of CISOs today that have no idea what the company that they work for does for a living, how they make money, who are their external stakeholders, what laws, regulations, legislations, etc. are relevant for them. And I think that CISOs that come to the board or come to the C-level executives with that information, with that curiosity, and ask the right business questions are already in a better position to communicate because they understand where the organization and where their organization leaders are coming from. But I think that it's also a perception thing. How would my customers react to a data breach? It's very different if I'm a law firm, as you mentioned. It's probably very different if I work corporate law and I do a lot of M&As. It's probably very different than if I'm still a lawyer, but I do civil war. I don't know. I do family law. That's
Well,
completely different.
and it's completely different if you are providing services to like a medical facility, and then their stuff gets ransomed, and their imminent medical data that needs to be used for a surgery, that needs to be used for like God forbid you're right in the middle of a surgery and you're using robotics, and now the equipment is no longer being used. And let's be honest, some surgeries are done remote and some surgeries are done with high availability, and I'm not an expert on this, but your stakeholders, sometimes it's really hard to figure out your stakeholders. If you're a let's say you're an EDR provider, you're providing endpoint detection and response, and then all of a sudden your software no longer works correctly, or somehow or another through a supply chain, your software now has put a virus on on or a Trojan or something on a medical facility. Who's your stakeholders? Well, yeah, of course the hospital, of course the medical people there, but even the patients have become stakeholders now, and their family members. So even though it might not seem like it's a direct stakeholder, they're still stakeholders. They don't know you exist, but at the same time, guess what? If
The-
they're directly affected. It's almost like saying, "Hey, I'm going to buy meat from a company, and I'm selling it to that restaurant, but my freezers went out, and I didn't realize, and I delivered bad meat, and now the people consuming it I never met in my life got sick." They're a
Mhm.
stakeholder.
Well, it just reminded me of something that happened this week. I think it was Thursday or some Friday. I don't know. I was trying to work on Canva, which I usually do. I'm working. I create a lot of presentations, and I was trying to work on Canva, and it wouldn't save. It wouldn't connect. I said, "Do I have a connectivity issue?" No, it's been going on for a few days that I had issues with Canva, and I'm looking at Down Detector. No one is complaining about it, and I go online on forums. No one is saying anything. I said, "Okay, it has to be here." I'm looking what's going on. I have the everything is fine. I'm looking at the net, everything is fine. So I was saying, okay, what happened in the last week? What did I change? So I was starting to take out extensions, and I closed my VPN, and at some point I found a specific extension of a service that I'm not going to mention because I really love it and I really want to give them the chance to fix it. I actually sent a LinkedIn message to the CEO because I'm a very rude, terrible, terrible Israeli, very upfront. So I found him on LinkedIn and just sent him a message. But apparently, it's a very cool AI tool that I use daily, and their Chrome extension wouldn't work with made Canva not work. I have no idea why. I didn't have time to start researching it. At the end of the day, I had to take off the extension, and now I can work on Canva again. And it's one of the things that I don't think they even considered. To be honest, I'm trying to think: would I have tried to find out if my extension can cause failures with other tools? No, I wouldn't. Not like no, I wouldn't assume that that would happen. So.
You bring up such a great point, right? Imagine Google, and I hate to say Google, but they're so important in a lot of people's lives. Imagine for some strange reason their root DNS servers no longer worked. With
It
90,
happened
no, I know, but I'm
with
saying like,
Din.
yeah, it did. But I'm talking about like, let's say it happened, and literally every region, every place in the world. And I know recently it happened where something similar to that happened, but I'm saying, and now 98% of the people in the world, probably more than that, don't know to change their root DNS server if they're using it, or they have a they go to another DNS server, and the other DNS server goes to a root DNS server. How many people can fix that? The first calls that are going to be is the internet's broken, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that before. So my point is now you have law firms, government, medical facilities, the teacher, the person down the block. All these people have issues. And guess what? There are people out there who have pacemakers, and their pacemakers are connected to devices in their house that reads the pacemakers, and they can fire electronically if there's issues, and those pacemakers can no longer communicate. Oh my God, the person's having VTAC or whatever it is. So there's a lot of stakeholders, so many different people. It might affect them economically, it might affect them medically. You know, it's
It's
crazy. Look, a cyber criminal can kill somebody by over changing the pacemaker that's overclocked. So
yeah,
my point is there's so many different stakeholders. And let's say that all of a sudden now the person, let's say a threat actor causes an issue to somebody's pacemaker, and then they do communicate back. Guess what? Let's say that paramedic racing to save that person's life gets into an accident. Who is that? Are they a kind of a sort of a stakeholder? So I mean, maybe it's a stretch, but I'm saying is you don't always know every stakeholder, and you can't always plan for every action, but you want to do your best by getting the main stakeholders.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's very challenging today. I think that in today's world, there are so many stakeholders, as you said, and we have so many interdependencies. Like when I was working for a fintech company, my developers hated it when I said it. When I told them, look, you're not actually building a bank, you're building a very pretty app that has dozens and over 100 critical APIs that's the actual bank, but no one will go to them and tell them, oh, I lost money, it's your fault. No, they will come to us because we're the responsible ones and we don't know how many APIs are behind them. And you mentioned that you're working a lot around new technologies, emerging technologies, AI, obviously. How do we deal with that today? That you implement an AI tool and they have half a dozen other AI tools behind them, and each one of those has another. So it's sort of like a never ending change. So, how do we deal with that? How do we ensure that effective risk assessment? Can we even assess those risks?
It takes a lot of work. Look, I would almost argue that everything you do in this world relies on the internet. Almost everything, whether you're going to drive your car and you have GPS. Can you imagine not having GPS these days? Pulling out the old maps. I
No.
would argue that when you leave your house, people turn on their alarm. I would argue that even you placing your orders for, and I hate to say names of companies, Amazon. Can you imagine what would happen if you didn't have the internet to order Amazon, and then everybody decided to go to the brick and mortar stores, and the lines would be out the door? And I know people complain, like, people should frequent the businesses locally, but I can sit there and tell you my TV. I don't have cable TV. I
Me
use I
neither.
use a service online. Um, Everything. So when we say stakeholders, what are we talking about? Are we talking about EDR? Are we talking about like you said, the APIs? And guess what? There's so many OT devices, that you can't even plan because the way they're built does not always have security in mind. Whether it's your TV, whether it's your even your cell phone. I mean, how many people have infiltrated or caused problems to people's cell phones? Whether it's Pegasus, being that
See.
app to have command and control of your phone. Whether it's people finding vulnerabilities, there's so many stakeholders. What you can't even plan for the unknowns. You can't plan for 0 days. So you can only do your best, right? And people say, yeah, you can plan for 0 days. How? Do microsegmentation and try to close all the ports, and then people like to do you know uh, zero trust. I mean, yeah, but then how much money do you have in your bank to build out this significant, incredible cybersecurity program? And how does a person who
Oh.
has your own store, a small store, even if it's $1 million store in the U.S., that's still small.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It goes back to the question of, does the CISO or the cybersecurity manager or whatever we call him, how much he understands the business? Because there has to be a balance. I mean, to do the cybersecurity program that to implement the cybersecurity program I would have wanted for, let's say, that fintech, it would have been more than our annual profit probably 5 years from now, because we're just starting out. So you can't do that. You have to understand the business. You have to find a solution that is good enough and will give you the risk level that you can live with. But on the other hand, you can't go overboard and take the business out of business. Yeah, basically. So I think that that's very challenging. That's sort of a balance that is very hard to
It's risk
maintain.
versus reward. It always is, May. It's risk versus reward. When I
Yeah.
was working, I was, obviously, Joe, my
Yeah.
podcast partner, and
The
I
amazing
worked for
Joe
him.
Batty was also here.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Yeah, he beat me to the punch.
Yeah.
So Joe and I had a conversation. We're talking about doing packet inspection, but packet inspection costs $2.5 million. 2.5 million US dollars is a lot of money. But I'm pretty damn sure with packet inspection, I would be able to find a threat actor a lot easier. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of threat actors. They're like, swimming in there and they're tunneling in and they have great ways of getting in, right? But it would have covered more of the threat. But do you spend $2.5 million for a program
Yeah.
to do packet inspection? Or do you say, okay, if something happens, it might cost me 3.5 million to recover. So you're taking a risk, right? That's what a CISO does along with the CFO and the CEO. You know, Together the C-level people, and there's always teams that evaluate this, right? There might be the board of directors, there might be an architecture committee, there might be a financial committee. They're gonna say, I don't know technology. I don't need to know technology. Tell me what the risk is. What's the
Hmm.
chance that you think that a threat actor is going to do this to me? Or what's the chance my server is going to die? Let's not even talk about cyber. What is the chance that my infrastructure is going to suffer a catastrophic failure? My hard drives, my RAID array, my internet connection. What are the chances? Oh, there's an 80% chance that my internet can go down and I'm a high frequency trader. Then I need three ISPs with lots of routers and lots of switches and lots of failover. So that's why a CISO along with the board of directors and C-level people, they got to make decisions based on your facts. Ultimately, if the CISO does not provide the facts in the best possible fashion, and they don't need to know everything, it falls on a CISO.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you have a lot of experience throughout your career. You said that today you do cybersecurity on the side. We know that it's more than on the side, but it's fine. I'm not gonna. You can't really take people outside of cybersecurity. I don't think so. I want to ask you, throughout your career, you've seen this industry evolve so much. Seen the tech industry in general and specifically cybersecurity evolve so much in so many ways. New technologies are currently being invented and implemented on a day-to-day basis. How do you stay up to date?
It's funny, right? It's very daunting, and when I say daunting, and I've been asked this before, people have reached out to me because of Joe and my podcast, and asked me these questions. And I'll tell you this: you can't know everything about everything. If you try to do that, it's an ultimate failure. It's a catastrophic failure. You got to be a SME, right? You got to be a subject matter expert in an area and stay in that area and stay in that lane. But it does not mean you should learn about the other stuff around it. But do not try to know everything about micro segmentation and AI and SIM and EDR and application and vulnerabilities and incident response and whatever it is. I know in some companies you're a generalist, and there's nothing wrong with that. I actually think I'm more of a generalist than anything else in my life. I love being able to do system architecture, but I also love to give people direction. And people think if you're a CISO, if you're a CTO, if you're a director somewhere, you collectively know everything that all your employees do. Absolutely not. You know enough to know to hire people smarter than you that can give you good direction, and that's what your job is. Your job is to evaluate what your smart people know and make decisions based on that. But there's no way I'm going to collectively know everything that all my employees would know if I was in that management role.
Absolutely, that's spot on. I think that's what makes a good manager, knowing what they do know, what they don't know, and letting the people around them direct them where they need to go. Like I would expect my stakeholders, my board, my C level, if they're counting on me as their CISO and they're asking me for advice, it's my job to know cybersecurity. It's not my job to teach them cybersecurity. I need to give them enough information and the right information and the full the full scope of the information that they need to make the decisions. They don't need to configure the firewall. To be honest, I don't need to configure the firewall today. I wouldn't trust myself to configure a firewall anymore.
Well,
It's been too long.
let me throw a grenade in there, right? So
Hmm.
here's the funny part, right? For 20, I don't know, 26 years, I've been an EMT, emergency medical technician. For those who don't know what that is, in other areas of the world, those are the people in the ambulances that provide medical care as a first responder. I don't think everybody knows the term EMT. And I would show up on a scene, and every once in a while, I got that doctor, the really smart person who knew everything. You're doing this wrong. You're doing that wrong. You're doing this wrong. Okay, I'll take that, sir, ma'am. Please give me your credentials so I can document what medical care you're giving me. I'm not giving you that. So what I'm getting at is sometimes that C-level person, that CFO, that CEO, that person who thinks they know more than you is actually even worse because they're giving you direction based on the minimal amount of knowledge they have. And sometimes they are not empowering you to give the right stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. People make mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. I'm sure CISOs make mistakes. But when you start getting being micromanaged from a point where that person thinks they know more than you, or maybe they do, then maybe they should be in that role and they should get somebody else in the other role. But allow the person that's responsible for that program to manage. If you don't think they're the right person, get rid of them. But if you have to constantly feel the need to give them direction and tell them everything they need to do on a constant basis, that relationship is not good.
I completely agree. I completely agree. Well, we're I can't believe that instead of doing what I was planning to do, we're like freestyling it. But I do want to go back to one thing that I was planning to ask you before we
Sure,
wrap up. You've been involved in this industry for so long. You have how many certifications have you had over the years?
a lot, uh,
A lot.
and a lot in the tens, in the tens, and the tens, and tens, and tens.
Well, and you've said, and I completely agree with you, that you can't know everything and you have to focus and etc. And you always try to stay up to date and everything. Now, I know that a lot of people that are aspiring to a career in cybersecurity specifically, or to be honest, I think it's in tech in general, but I'm a cybersecurity nerd, so I'll stay in cybersecurity. What would you tell someone starting out or mid career that is looking to grow in this industry? Would certification be the right path with hands on training, on job training? What would you say would be the best path to build a career in cybersecurity?
Oh God, man, if you ask 100 people, you'll get 200 answers. I'm
True.
not going to tell you certifications are the most important thing. I'm not going to tell you hands-on is the most important thing. It really is specific to the person that you're going to work for, the industry. If I went to Joe Patty and said I had 50 certifications, he's like, I don't care. If I went to Joe Patty and said I have a doctorate, he's like, get out of here. Um, some people believe if you're in the help desk for more than a certain amount of years, then you've already been tainted. So what I'm getting at is that you have to figure out what you want to do, and you have to get good at what you want to do and be confident. But I'm going to tell anybody who's not in this career, you can apply for 100 jobs and not get a single job. You got to be persistent. You got to know your stuff, and you got to be able to take no for an answer. But the most important thing is to be confident in your capabilities and constantly learn, because you're going to constantly feel, and I say constantly over and over, you're going to constantly feel like people are putting you down. People don't give you the respect that you need, or they're not giving you a chance, or not giving you the opportunity. Pick your discipline. You could be a generalist, you could be a sim, whatever it is, but learn it. Know your stuff in and out. And I guarantee you, as much as you know, you might get interviewed by a person who knows less until you don't know anything.
Hmm. That's
So just
true.
be confident. Be confident and keep at it.
I love that. Keep at it, I think, is fantastic. Towards the end of these sessions, I always like to have those short pop quizzes with very short answer questions and answers, hearing a little bit about your perspective. So I want to start with something that I know we already dealt in a little bit, and I want to ask you about ethical ethics. If you could teach one ethical principle to everyone that is in the cybersecurity industry, what would it be?
Well, it depends on what you mean by ethical, but my thing is be as transparent as possible. If you screwed up, you screwed up. If you don't know, you don't know. If you do know, be humble. Try to not embarrass people, take people to the side. So my point is communicate constantly. That's the ethical part. If you made a mistake at something, you were configuring a proxy, and by mistake you opened up something and that caused an issue, it can translate to millions of dollars. Fess up. If they fire you, they fire you. There's nothing you can do about it. But you hiding it, it's going to be found eventually. So be transparent about everything that you do to a fault.
Love that.
Some people don't like that, and if they don't, then that relationship was not meant to happen, or meant to keep it together. So that's my ethics. Be transparent, communicate often.
I love that. If you hadn't chosen a career in tech, what would you be doing today?
Flight medic.
Flight medic.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool and very specific. Okay.
I always
Okay.
wanted to be a flight medic. I always wanted to either ride in a helicopter, ride in a plane, and take care of sick people. It's something I always wanted to do.
Sure.
Unfortunately, you know, having a family, um, and the amount of money that you make, and God bless all my first responder friends. God bless them. They don't get paid nearly enough to what they do, but it's not a lucrative career.
Sure. What's the most memorable feedback you've ever received? It could be positive, negative
Trying to
in your
think.
career.
Oh man. Oh, I've never said this publicly. I work for a person. I just got a raise. I just got um, above accrual on my bonus, and the person said to me, "You might be an athlete, but you're not an Olympic athlete, and your next step is to get my job. And you're not getting it." So that was something that somebody said to me. Maybe they thought I was competitive with them. I don't know, but it was an interesting feedback I'll never forget the rest of my life. So I'm like, "Oh, you might know your stuff, but you're not like incredible at your stuff. And your job is in your next step in your career would be to move into my position. You're not getting it."
That
I wasn't
is
trying to.
that is like it's it's harsh, it's interesting, it's inspiring as well. Yeah, that's an interesting feedback. Thank you for sharing it. And sort of last but not least, because that's something I'm very interested in, how do you celebrate your achievements?
With humility, it's just another bump. You know, I
Hmm.
so I'll tell you this. In high school, my grade point average was 64. You needed a 65 to get out. And or I won't go into how it worked out, but somebody called somebody and said, "Let Adam graduate," and I did. So I was a horrible, horrible student in high school. Since then, I'm an overachiever. I constantly keep on proving to myself how much I've learned and how good I might be. But certifications and achievements don't mean anything unless you're humble. You can't walk around thinking you know everything because there's always somebody that knows a lot more than me. I always joke around. There's plenty of people who are much better looking than me, much smarter than me, you know, have more achievements. But I'll tell you this, out of all the organizations I worked at, some of the most powerful people in the world that I did work for were the most humble and gentle and quietest people. You could walk by them on the street and they might turn around like you might let's just say you drop something. They're the first people I've seen to go to pick things up, and they don't walk around saying, "I'm the CEO of a Fortune 100 company."
I love that. Though I do think that one of the things that I'm trying to work on is to celebrate achievements because I think that when you reach a milestone, you have to acknowledge that you achieved something. Stay humble, absolutely. Learn more, honor others, absolutely. But I think that we tend to sort of brush off our successes, and I think it is important to acknowledge that.
Well, I mean, from look, cybersecurity or anybody in their career until the day they retire is a race that never ends. And I say it's a race because you're always running a mile a minute. Every single one of us, whether you're doing incident response or responding to a client at 3 a.m., your time, whatever it is, you're always trying to achieve something. You're always trying to get to that next step. And then you get to that next step and it's like, oh, okay, that's not enough. Let me get to the next step. People in our industry are self deprecating. They
Exactly.
always are self deprecating. I should have known that. How can I not know that? I've learned that, and we always talk. We always put our negative stuff. We always advertise our negative stuff in a way. Like, can you believe me? I didn't know that I was doing that. I was configuring the firewall, and port 443 wasn't open, but 80 was, and then when it was SSL, we always talk about how we screwed up. But you know, can you imagine? I went on LinkedIn tomorrow and I said, I just got my CCIE, my CISSP, my CISM, my ISSAP, my doctorate. I try not to advertise any of that stuff in this. Well, not that I have all that stuff. I don't, by the way. So,
You have
but
a lot
the
of this
point I'm
stuff.
but the point I'm making is I don't like to sit there and brag and boast. But I think it's important for us who have achieved things to help our peers to achieve as well. Because this is a career where we all should be working together, not against each other. And I say that for any career, really. But, like if I got my CSSP tomorrow, should I say, hey guys, I got my CSSP, like one last thing, right? I practice martial arts, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, I got a white belt. I was like, yeah, I'm a white belt. Then I got my next belts and I went to a green belt, a blue belt, and I thought I knew everything. And then I became a black belt. And I realized, oh my God, I know absolutely nothing. That is the awakening part. When you get
Yeah.
that next thing, you realize, wow, I really don't know anything. Again, we're always self deprecating. We always say, I should have known that. It's an epiphany. You don't know anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
It's,
true.
it's
That's
humbling.
true. It is. It is. I like that. The humbling side. I'm really working on myself to try to celebrate achievements. So,
Hey, listen, when you're in New York City, you get
no.
together with
Yeah.
Joe and I. We're
Oh,
gonna
yeah,
go
yeah.
celebrate all our achievements. We're gonna
Oh, I
sit
don't.
there.
The problem is when you don't remember. You only remember what you haven't done, what you haven't achieved, what you don't do. That's why I think that, and I agree. I think that specifically in cybersecurity, we are self-deprecating all the time, and we don't stop and say, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that, but I did know that."
So David. I'm not
I
gonna say
think
his
it
last name.
has to be
David.
like,
David
yeah,
W. I'll
yeah,
leave it at that. And I've had this conversation with him over and over again. And he's like, Adam, I go, David, I want to be as knowledgeable as you. He's like Adam, what are you talking about? Like you are. I'm like, no, I'm not. I've never done what you've done. You guys are like freaking insane. You guys had the opportunity to do some of the most craziest things in the world. He goes, but it doesn't mean that you don't understand. You don't have the knowledge. So we often put other people on a pedestal, wanting to
yeah.
be them, but just be you.
I love that. Just be you.
Be the
I
best
really love
possible
that.
you.
Adam, thank you so much for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm going to keep that just be you. I think I'm going to put it on a sticky note somewhere here in the office because I really love that. And thank you again for joining me. And I hope to see everyone next time on Cyber Mania.